Alright, hi. So my name is Taylor Hartman, and I'm doing my project on the Athens Mental Insane Asylum and Cemetery. I'm going to try and make this as quick as possible. I know that everyone has different lengths of videos, but I will try to make this pain-free for all of you. So asylums have existed in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, Toledo, Akron, and Dayton. And Southeastern Ohio's hospital was established in Athens, near the campus of Ohio University. Today, the only one of Ohio's mental hospitals which still stands is anything that resembles the original structure of what it used to be, which is Athens Mental Health Center, also known as the Ridges. Originally named the Athens Asylum for the Insane, the massive institution first opened its doors on January 9th, 1874. The state and federal government had purchased more than 1,000 acres of land from the Coates family, whose farm had previously occupied the spot, and spent 6 years building the hospital. Giant asylums like the Kirkbride style were going up all over America at the time because of the number of Civil War veterans suffering from PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. If you visit the cemeteries now currently, behind the building there's a lot of large tombstones that have their military number that they used on these silver plaques embroidered, hammered in. The first patients at the Ridges was believed to be Thomas Armstrong from Belmont County, followed by Daniel Fremau. I think he's French, and apparently he thought he was the second coming of Jesus, so that might be why he was in there. But regards to him, he died shortly after intake. The asylum itself was built from bricks, which were fired on site from clay dug on site as well. Herman Harlan, a student of Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the designer of Central Park, was responsible for the design of the hospital and its grounds. By the turn of the 20th century, orchards and farmland remained maintained on the property, in which they were also tended by residents and staff employees. Uh, Having this made the hospital very self-sufficient. But nevertheless, at the time of its construction, it was a major boon to the economy of the city of Athens because of the ability to supply its own milk and eggs and other necessities, including linens and of the sort. Local citizens made use of Ireland's extensive grounds, which included landscaped hills and trees, a pond, a spring, and a waterfall. Thomas Story Kirkbride's designs centered around the idea that it was therapeutic for patients to be housed in a facility that resembled a house or a home. In a Kirkbride building, the less disturbed patients were housed closer to the center, whereas the administrative offices and employees' housings were. However, the more violent patients were housed at the far end of either of the long side wings of the building, farthest away from the center, which was the only part of the building that was convenient for entries and exits. The center tried to incorporate more socialization and have patients be accustomed to human contact. The Athens building itself had around 544 patient rooms. When it opened in 1874, it housed around 200 patients. The more sedated among them participated in recreational activities like boating, painting, dancing, and picnics, and they were also offered church services and plays because of their good behavior or if their deemed behavior, and were often free to roam the grounds, that type of thing. Some patients even tended the farms and orchards, which is interesting because none of this would be possible today under certain circumstances. Nurses that were trained at the Athens State Hospital School of Nursing inside the hospital. It took place in the hospital, sorry, and they were also able to live there while they cared for other inhabitants, almost like an internship, but you get to live there. Yeah. The late 19th century was a good time for the mentally ill, which is bad to say, but it was because the progressive ideal of Americans at the time had policies that were modeled after a lot of European styles, and this gave people confidence in a way that they loved, in the way that they could drop off their hates his, but like drop off their loved ones and give them to a place that they knew that they would get good care. The downside of this progress was that the increasing popularity of these asylums, especially in Athens, uh, it was common for families to drop off elderly relatives or very very young ones and just just kind of drop them off, kind of like how you think of like a child being put into a basket and putting on someone's doorstep, kind of like that. And that became a big problem when people couldn't take care of their children or whatever. They would rely on the hospitals and just toss them over, but the hospital could no longer afford to care for them because of the accumulation of random patients or people. Um, this also became a spot for homeless people to call their home, and it was around 200 of patients who were originally incorporated in the hospital, but around the 1900s, the early 1900s, it shot up to at least 2000, early 2000 people. The overcrowding of this led to sharing of patient rooms, beds, chairs, all everything, and this also resulted in a severe decline in patient quality, and the staff had a very, very difficult time using what they had to help them because of the overpopulation. And the size of the staff barely increased since 1874 alone, so it became very, very difficult. And this decrease in individualized care and attention led to a renaissance of the very, very primitive mental hospitals, and this became a very big problem. And when it became hit in the media, a lot of people tried to fix their bad ways and try to make mental asylums more appropriate and more regulated. So that was, I guess, that's a positive thing that came out of it. Um, Inside the hospital, there were four typical treatments that occurred. One was water treatment, shock therapy, lobotomy, the original kind, and transorbital lobotomy. Now, with water treatment, patients were usually submerged in ice cold water, or they were wrapped in sheets and linens, and they were forced to be submerged underwater and just kind of, oh, hey, we're going to put you in a big tub of ice cold water. Hope this gets rid of your bad thoughts and bad ideals, because this is supposed to shock them into different states of minds because of the actual shock of being submerged into ice. And there was also shock therapy, where electric electrodes were hooked through sponge. It's hard to explain. Think a of tweezers, but they're being put over your head, and on each side there is sponges that allow electrical currents to go through. Now these currents were put through the temples, and the idea was that the electric currents would be processed through the firing of neurons, and that those neurons would pass through to the other axons and dendrites of other um, neurons, and that it would cause the imbalance, whatever the person had, to have a good balance, and that the mind would suddenly change, and the way of thinking through the firing of different neurons and everything would create a good balance in the brain. But this also caused a lot of people to bite off their own tongues because of the pressure and the pain of the electricity. They bite their own tongues off, they would end up dying, that kind of thing. So it became um, a bad example of electroshock therapy, and it also resulted in convulsions and stuff like that. With the original type of lobotomy, people were people's neural passages were separated through the skull, and they were cracked open, and things were cut through the temples, and electrodes were used to um, just a lot of mess. There was a lot of people who worried about it because of the research behind it. There wasn't enough validity, and this open skull brain treatment was very tricky no matter how you went about it, because of the fear of, or the possibility of people dying, and it being so intrusive became a problem. And then there was the transorbital lobotomy, which was used in the early 1950s, which was similar to the original, but instead there was like doctors would use these picks that would go through the tear duct, and this happened while they were unconscious. Now it would go through this little like long spike would go through the tear duct, and there would be a mallet, and the doctor would just kind of hammer through and hopefully just trigger I don't. It's hard to explain. They would just try to like make sure that the neurons would be activated, and they were moved around. They were like moved around back and forth, and this was done with the instrument's called a lucitone, I think, and this also caused a lot of deaths, and it wasn't really valid, and it also was under a lot of media attention. And today, it's rarely used, and it's a very mediocre and a crude way to do surgery, and it was a very big fad. It was a big fad back then because everyone thought it was the newest and biggest thing, and it ended up causing more severe conditions than it helped people. So around the 40s and 50s, when this was first being used, it was very rudimentary, and people thought it was big, but nowadays it's not. But because of this, um, a lot of the treatments involved did not include individualized therapy, and all these other uh, intrusive techniques made life much worse in the hospitals. So, in regards to the cemetery, switching gears here, depending on who you ask, there are 2 to 3 asylum cemeteries at the ridges, but the most famous one is at the rear of the asylum, and it is owned by the State Department of Mental Health from the Ridges Hospital. Very few of the gravestones feature the full names. A couple have been replaced with better stones engraved with names and dates, but that only happens when someone's descendants bear the expense of having a new tombstone put in. If you died while being a resident, you were given a small white stone with your patient number on it and nothing else. Hospital records tell who each number belonged to, and which is why several hundred of the unmarked stones are accompanied by metal veterans plaques. There are a lot of Civil War veterans, like I mentioned way earlier in this PowerPoint or in this project about the Ridges Graveyard. There's a lot of Civil War veterans, and when it was built, there was an entire county full of veterans, a whole section of the cemetery, due to the increased amount of patients who were let in. And due to missing records, the identities of male patients with numbers 1 through 63 are lost to history, along with male number 64 and female number 1 were both interred in 1880. Now, in total, there were roughly about 2,000 people who were admitted into the state hospital before 1972. When the burials ended, they had around 874 females and about 1,117 males. And since men and women were outnumbered or were numbered separately, there are 2 gravestones for each number through 847. Now, in regards to other aspects of the cemetery, there is belief that it's the way that this if you look from above, the way, and you look online too, you can see pictures, but there's people who believe that the way, if you look from on top of the buildings, it looks like a pentagram, the way that the shape of the cemetery is set up, and people thought it was very demonic, and it holds true to certain people that like ghosts appear, and then you can see people and this and that and through windows and everything, and you can't prove it or disprove it, I guess, but it's just speculation that there are horror stories and there's myths and rumors about all this, but that's just an interesting fact I like to tie in um, with death, because people are so fascinated that they try to make up stories, or they try to connect things that they don't know and try to make remedy of the situation by trying to explain it or try to give it meaning and value by saying that, oh, well, those people are, they were mistreated and that their ghosts are seeking revenge and this and that, and it's demonic because witches used to have seances in the graveyards and this and that. But regardless, uh, to me, it is just a graveyard. But everyone has their beliefs on that subject. But pretty much that's about it. I mean, I wanted to pick something that was different, but I also wanted to make sure that it was something that I enjoyed, that I would enjoy talking about and researching. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Sorry if it was longer than 10 minutes. I don't know how fast or slow I was going. I just wanted to get it done with. But I hope it was informative and you all enjoyed. And if you have any questions, you can email me, whatever. I'm sure. But I hope you all had a happy Easter, and I'll see you around. Okay, bye.